Human landscapes have never existed in isolation. From the earliest permanent settlements to complex urban systems, location was never chosen solely for scenery, soil, or climate. It was chosen for connection. Long before cities were defined by walls or skylines, they were defined by movement. Goods, people, ideas, pathogens, technologies. What passed through a place mattered more than what stood still within it. Archaeological and anthropological research consistently shows that human settlement behaves like an adaptive system embedded within larger networks. In this sense, trade routes functioned as ecological corridors, linking distant environments and redistributing resources across space. Where these corridors intersected, human landscapes emerged. Where they intensified, those landscapes expanded. And where they weakened, decline began long before abandonment became visible. From an evolutionary perspective, trade networks acted as risk buffering mechanisms. They reduced local environmental uncertainty by extending access beyond immediate ecosystems. A settlement connected to exchange routes was not limited to local crop failure, mineral scarcity, or climatic fluctuation. It could import what it lacked and export what it produced efficiently. This adaptive advantage explains why early trade hubs appear repeatedly in marginal environments, deserts, mountain passes, river deltas, and ecological boundaries. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe if you're enjoying Primal Roots. Location, therefore, was not passive geography. It was a strategic position within a flow system. Roman road towns, Silk Road caravanserais, medieval river ports, and coastal entrepôts all shared the same structural logic. Their survival depended on throughput. When flow was continuous, populations stabilized, infrastructure accumulated, and landscapes became increasingly anthropogenic. When flow slowed, the system began to destabilize. This destabilization did not occur suddenly. Scientific evidence indicates that the first signals of collapse were subtle. Archaeological layers show a gradual reduction in imported materials. Coin circulation thins. Craft specialization declines. Maintenance of roads, wells, and public structures becomes intermittent. These changes reflect a loss of surplus, not a crisis event. The landscape remains occupied, but its internal energy budget begins to fail. Human geography studies describe this process as a shift from network centrality to peripheralization. A settlement does not disappear because it becomes uninhabitable. It disappears because it becomes irrelevant. As trade routes reconfigure due to political fragmentation, technological innovation, or environmental change, certain nodes lose their functional role. Their location, once advantageous, becomes neutral or even maladaptive. Historical examples follow this pattern with remarkable consistency. Roman towns along secondary roads declined as imperial logistics collapsed. Oasis settlements along overland routes lost population when maritime trade expanded. River towns weakened when sedimentation altered navigability. In each case, geography did not change dramatically. Connectivity did. From a biological standpoint, populations respond predictably to this shift. Reduced trade connectivity leads to reduced dietary diversity, increased physiological stress, and higher demographic volatility. Bioarchaeological evidence reveals elevated markers of malnutrition and disease across generations, not spikes of trauma. This is slow failure, not catastrophe. As connectivity weakens, migration becomes the primary adaptive response. Individuals and families relocate toward landscapes with higher network density, reinforcing decline through feedback loops. Fewer people remain to maintain infrastructure. Fewer exchanges justify investment. The built environment persists physically, but functionally it begins to fragment. This stage marks the beginning of landscape decoupling. human systems and their environments fall out of synchronization. Fields revert to mixed use, roads erode, urban cores shrink. Ecological succession advances gradually, reclaiming spaces once held in balance by continuous human input. The collapse is not dramatic. It is incremental, measurable, and often overlooked. Scientific consensus is clear on one point. Human landscapes are not sustained by permanence or scale. They are sustained by connection. When trade routes change, the landscape does not fail immediately. It enters a prolonged adaptive lag, attempting to function under conditions for which it was not designed. What follows is not disappearance, but transformation. And that transformation begins with location losing its meaning within the network that once defined it. When trade routes shift, the disruption is not experienced evenly across a landscape. Some locations adapt, others enter a prolonged phase of decline. The determining factor is not cultural sophistication or architectural complexity, but adaptive flexibility. Scientific research in historical geography and human ecology shows that landscapes embedded in rigid economic roles are the most vulnerable to network disruption. Trade-dependent settlements evolved around specialization. Their location dictated their function. A river port moved grain. A mountain pass controlled transit. A desert oasis supported caravans. These roles shaped infrastructure, labor organization, and demographic structure. When connectivity weakened, the economic niche collapsed first. What followed was a biological and ecological response, unfolding across generations. Archaeological evidence reveals that early disruption manifests as economic contraction rather than abandonment. Imported goods decline in frequency and diversity. Ceramic assemblages become more locally sourced. Coinage circulation decreases, indicating reduced market integration. These patterns have been documented extensively in Roman provincial towns and medieval European market centers, particularly in research synthesized by historian and archaeologist Bryan Ward-Perkins in The Fall of Rome and the End of Civilization. His work demonstrates that economic disintegration precedes physical collapse by decades, sometimes centuries. As economic specialization fails, populations face adaptive pressure. Anthropology and evolutionary biology frame this as a loss of buffering capacity. Trade networks once compensated for local shortfalls. Without them, communities become exposed to environmental variability. Crop failures, droughts, or seasonal shortages carry greater biological cost. This vulnerability is not hypothetical. It is recorded in skeletal remains. Bioarchaeological studies using stable isotope analysis show measurable dietary narrowing in declining trade hubs. Carbon and nitrogen isotopes indicate reduced access to non-local food sources. Protein intake becomes less diverse. Childhood stress markers increase. Linear enamel hyperplasia, a marker of early life nutritional stress, appears more frequently in later occupation phases. These findings are consistent across regions, from post-Roman Europe to Silk Road settlements in Central Asia. This biological stress does not immediately depopulate a settlement. Instead, it alters demographic dynamics. Fertility rates decline. Infant mortality rises, population replacement slows. Over time, the age structure shifts, leaving fewer working-age adults capable of maintaining infrastructure. Roads degrade, irrigation systems fail, public spaces shrink. The landscape enters a feedback loop where reduced population accelerates environmental degradation, and environmental degradation further reduces population viability. Adaptation is possible, but it is constrained by location. Some settlements successfully reposition within emerging networks. Others shift economic focus, from trade to subsistence, from exchange to extraction, or from regional markets to local resilience. Historical geography identifies these cases as adaptive realignments. However, adaptation requires connectivity of a different kind. Access to new routes, new technologies, or new political frameworks determines survival. Where adaptation fails, migration becomes the dominant evolutionary strategy. Human populations have always responded to declining resource stability through movement. This is not collapse, but selection. Individuals relocate toward landscapes with higher energy return and network integration. The result is a slow demographic bleed rather than a sudden exodus. This pattern aligns with settlement network models developed by geographer Michael E. Smith, whose work on urban resilience and connectivity demonstrates that centrality within a network predicts long-term persistence more reliably than population size or monumentality. Settlements that lose centrality experience gradual marginalization. Their landscapes persist physically, but functionally they decouple from regional systems. Ecological processes accelerate this decoupling. Reduced human maintenance allows vegetation to reclaim built spaces. Agricultural fields transition into mixed-use environments. Soil composition changes as irrigation ceases. Wildlife corridors re-emerge. From a landscape ecology perspective, this is secondary succession, driven not by natural disaster, but by systemic human withdrawal. Importantly, scientific consensus rejects the idea of uniform collapse. Decline is uneven. It is spatially fragmented. Some neighborhoods persist while others empty. Some functions survive while others vanish. This heterogeneity is visible in stratigraphic records and settlement maps. It reflects the complex interaction between human agency and structural constraint. Debate remains regarding the relative influence of trade disruption versus political instability or climate variability. Current interdisciplinary research suggests these factors are not independent. Trade networks amplify or dampen the impact of environmental and political stresses. When connectivity is high, societies absorb shocks. When connectivity fails, the same shocks become catastrophic. By the end of this phase, the landscape has not disappeared. It has transformed. What was once a node in a global or regional network becomes a local habitat again. Human presence continues, but at a different scale, with different biological costs and under different adaptive rules. This transformation is not an anomaly. It is a recurring outcome in human history. The slow collapse of trade-dependent landscapes is not a failure of civilization, but a predictable consequence of network reorganization. Location determines opportunity. Adaptation determines survival. As connectivity continues to erode, human landscapes enter their final adaptive phase. This stage is not defined by abandonment alone, but by transformation at multiple scales. What once functioned as a node within a trade network becomes a localized ecological system again, shaped less by exchange and more by immediate environmental constraints. Location remains fixed, its meaning changes. From the perspective of landscape ecology, this transition is best described as rewilding through human withdrawal. Built environments do not vanish. They fragment. Roofs collapse first. Walls follow. Roads soften into linear clearings. What remains is a hybrid terrain, neither fully natural nor fully anthropogenic. Scientific surveys consistently show that these spaces develop unique ecological signatures, blending remnants of human infrastructure with emergent biological communities. This process follows predictable patterns. Reduced maintenance allows opportunistic species to colonize abandoned structures. Plants adapted to disturbed soils dominate early succession. Over time, more stable species establish themselves. Faunal diversity increases as human pressure declines. These changes have been documented in abandoned medieval villages, post-industrial landscapes, and long-declining rural settlements across Europe and Asia. Human presence rarely disappears completely. Instead, it contracts. Small populations persist, practicing subsistence strategies adapted to reduced connectivity. Anthropological research identifies this as economic simplification rather than regression. Complex systems collapse. Simpler systems endure. The landscape supports fewer people, but those who remain are more tightly coupled to local resources. Memory becomes a critical factor at this stage. Cultural memory outlasts economic relevance. Place names persist. Rituals continue. Oral histories reference a time when the landscape mattered to the wider world. Archaeology captures this tension between past function and present reality. Later occupation layers reuse materials from earlier phases. Stones from public buildings become domestic walls. Roads become paths. Infrastructure is not replaced, it is cannibalized. From an evolutionary standpoint, this is adaptation within constraint. Humans adjust behavior to match declining energy availability. Settlement density decreases. Mobility increases at smaller scales. Social networks shrink but intensify locally. These adaptations mirror patterns observed in prehistoric populations following environmental stress, reinforcing the idea that trade-driven landscapes are not fundamentally different from earlier human systems. They are simply more energetically demanding. There are limits to this adaptation. Landscapes designed for high-throughput exchange impose maintenance costs that low-density populations cannot sustain. Irrigation systems silt up. Terraces collapse. Flood control fails. These failures are not sudden. They accumulate. Each season without repair increases vulnerability to environmental variation. Over time, the landscape becomes actively hostile to the social system that once maintained it. Scientific models of coupled human-environment systems describe this as threshold crossing. Once maintenance drops below a critical level, recovery becomes improbable without external input. Trade routes once provided that input. Without them, the system stabilizes at a lower level of complexity. Importantly, this endpoint is not uniform across regions. Some landscapes stabilize as low-intensity cultural environments. Others transition almost entirely to ecological dominance. Climate, soil, and hydrology mediate outcomes. Location still matters, but only insofar as it supports local resilience rather than network centrality. Modern remote sensing and paleo-environmental studies have made these transitions visible at scale. Satellite imagery reveals abandoned field systems slowly erased by vegetation. Pollen records document shifts from cultivated species to wild assemblages. These data confirm what archaeology suggested long ago. Human landscapes are reversible. The persistence of ruins often creates an illusion of permanence. Stone structures endure. Meaning does not. A road without traffic is not a route. A port without ships is not a gateway. Function, not form, defines a landscape's role in human systems. When function disappears, the landscape enters a different evolutionary trajectory. The scientific consensus is cautious but clear. Trade networks enable complexity. They do not guarantee resilience. As networks reorganize, landscapes optimized for previous conditions struggle to adapt. Some succeed by redefining their role. Many do not. Their decline is not a failure of intelligence or culture. It is a mismatch between design and environment. This pattern has profound implications for understanding human history. It challenges narratives centered on conquest or catastrophe. It emphasizes slow variables, connectivity, maintenance, and biological cost. It reframes collapse as a process rather than an event. In this final stage, the landscape no longer collapses. It settles. What remains is not absence, but a quieter equilibrium. Human presence persists in fragments. Nature advances without opposition. Memory lingers without function. The slow collapse of human landscapes after trade routes changed is not an anomaly. It is an expression of a deeper rule. Human systems survive through connection. When connection fades, adaptation narrows. And when adaptation reaches its limits, the landscape remembers a different way to exist. If landscapes once disappeared when the flow of trade stopped, what invisible networks are sustaining the places we live in today? And how long would they last without them?